Too often we think of painting as a solitary act, but for Matt Connors, painting is a means of relating to the world, of filtering and processing aspects of contemporary life and culture that fascinate him. He often works with a restricted palette of colors and marks, yet they open up a dispersed network of references. He freely borrows structures and ideas from design, poetry, writing, music, and the history of painting. But his marks aren't derivative in any way. They're removed, distilled, and recontextualized, so that a poetic sense of things borrowed or overheard pervades the work, a really admirable quality in my mind. No single painting alone can speak adequately to the practice. The work is very relational in that sense. And like close friends, they tend to rub off on each other, exchanging mannerisms, habits, and turns of phrase. We're really lucky to be presenting 4 new works up in the exhibition, and to welcome Matt back to town from his new home in sunny Los Angeles. Notably, Matt has had solo exhibitions at the Kunsthalle Dusseldorf and at MoMA PS1, which was curated by past Walker curator Peter Ely. And also with Fergus Fahili, another artist featured in Painter Painter at a two-person exhibition at the Dallas Museum of Art. He's also shown extensively at galleries in New York, Los Angeles, and Berlin. And he has a swanky new book called A Bell is a Cup, published by Rainoff. Definitely a great addition to any Minneapolis coffee table. Matt Wolf is a New York-based nonfiction filmmaker who quite often finds inspiration in the lives and work of other artists, and more recently in the history of youth culture. His debut feature, Wild Combination, which profiled the elusive avant-garde cellist and disco producer Arthur Russell, premiered at the 2008 Berlin Film Festival and has played at over 60 international film festivals, museums, and cinemas. Matt's film, I Remember, which was released last year, profiles the artist and poet Joe Brainard, who is best known for his poem cycle of the same name and for his work in collage, painting, and assemblage. For this film, Matt structured his own collage of found footage with archival images of the artist set to the sound of Brainard reading and the poet Ron Padgett offering a very personal biography of his best friend, very apropos of our event tonight. Currently, Wolf is completing a new film with the seminal punk author Jon Savage, based on his groundbreaking book Teenage. Using archival footage and portraits of teenage characters from history, the film examines the birth of youth culture as well as the prehistory of modern teenagers in the first half of the 20th century. Teenage debuts next week, excitingly, at the Tribeca Film Festival and at Hot Docs Film Festival later this month. Nothing short of prolific, Wolf has also produced and directed short documentaries for the New York Times, the Sundance Channel, and PBS. So please help me welcome Matt Connors and Matt Wolf.
I'm Wolf. That's Connors.
And we both just had a lot of coffee.
So this is a bit of an experiment for us. We wanted to take up this challenge of not just talking about our work in a normal kind of Q&A format.
Yeah, I mean, I my most memorable lectures I've ever seen have kind of diverted from like the typical presentation of the work. So I've always wanted to, and recently I've not had so much fun doing that kind of lecture. So, and Matt and I've seen Matt interrogate and interview people on stage, and it's always been an amazing experience. Like, I think I saw you interview the Maisel brother. That was when I first met you, and it was just that was kind of how I got this idea. So we're gonna do like short,
just like this is what we do for
Yeah.
a little context, but maybe some context about us is that the way we met each other is that everybody kept asking us if we were friends. I'd say like 6 people asked me like, "Aren't you friends with Matt Connors?"
because I had moved away from New York, kind of like right when, or we had just missed each other, and I was getting the same question. And then when I moved back to New York, we had a friend date. We went to go see.
Yeah, I Facebooked him saying, "Everybody says we should be friends. You want to go to a movie together?" And then we became very good friends. And I guess the concept for the talk tonight is to kind of emulate, in a sense, the type of conversation that we would normally have. So,
which takes place in person and also like online and through text. It's like kind of
G-chat.
It's kind of like a model for the way I make my work, and I'm sure just like looking for things, processing them, sharing them, bouncing ideas off of your closest brains. So
yeah, Matt recommends tons of kind of cultural material that ends up really influencing me, and it happens in an incidental way. So we hope, we don't really we have a loose plan of how the conversation will flow, but we don't really know exactly what we're going to talk about. But do you want to maybe talk about your work first for a second?
Yeah, I can. and we're gonna, I guess, start with the laptop.
Computer.
I'm newly relocated, so I'm separated from my digital material, so I'm using my gallery's website to show you pictures. But and I'm just gonna cycle through it. But I grew up on the West Coast, and I went to undergrad at Bennington College, which is kind of a historically important place for abstract painting. And I had a really amazing kind of formative time there. And I moved to New York right afterwards, and I lived there for 10 years. And then I escaped from New York to go to grad school, and then I moved from grad school to Germany for a year. So I've just had kind of an itinerant bit of schooling and life. And I don't know how I'm just going to cycle through the paintings, but I call myself at this point an abstract painter, although the work kind of at times originates in points in the real world. The structure of the work is very generated from things I'm interested in: musical structure, musical genre, poetry, language. So it kind of takes the physical form ostensibly of abstract painting, but to me, I'm not. I mean, I'm starting to make more sculptural work, and I'm coming from the kind of a place of painting, but I'm kind of like overly interested in I'm kind of an omnivorous maker and consumer of culture, I guess. So I think the work, I often get accused of I often get the note that my shows a lot of times look like group shows, which I think I kind of like that criticism. But I think I have in my mind like kind of the bigger picture, and I'm hoping that there's a red thread kind of going through the whole thing, that either not necessarily it's a visual thing, but it's kind of a technique or a ideological thing. So this is just kind of a snapshot. That work is in the show right now. This is from the PS1, which was weirdly a kind of a mini retrospective of the last 5 years. So I'll just kind of cycle through it. I used to be a painter of small paintings, and I've kind of rebelled against that. A lot of my methodology is kind of like is like making problems for myself and then trying to solve them. So the scale problem, these two paintings were like the smallest and the largest in the show, so that kind of represents this kind of like troublemaking I try to do in my own process, and I value in other people's work as well. This is my last show in LA. Some sculptural elements. This piece here, I hate to point with the little hand, but is like to kind of make a point of cross-pollination of interests, is based pretty closely on the chair that I have bought at a vintage at a flea market. 4 chairs I have that I'm like obsessed with, and kind of just knew that I wanted to cycle into something that I made. And I guess I thought it would be a painting, and then I just had a moment of permission where I was like, I'm just gonna make another kind of another version of it. So it became this weird kind of, like, if you know the chair, it's pretty obviously related to it, but it becomes kind of like it goes through like the meat grinder and comes out the other end, and it's this weird object. That's all from this show. There was a floor. This is a suite of paintings I did for a show in Brussels. they were all made kind of on the floor, touching each other. They're kind of like monochromes, but they physically contaminate each other because I have to pick. I kind of early on in my career as a painter kind of realized I make a lot of mistakes, and then I kind of like made that partially my subject. Like when I had to pick up a painting and carry it over another one, it drips onto the painting, and I just kind of situations like that I started to embrace, and I can't like court them, but I kind of everything short of that. So these paintings are like ostensibly kind of these monochromes, but they're very contaminated and dirty, and they cross-pollinate very physically. So they kind of physically represent, and then they have these frames that are really, really purposefully clashing colors. My framer is always asking me if I'm sure when I give him the color chip for the frame, and then even when he gives it back to me, he's like, "You picked this color." I was like, "That's a better." So this was really specifically designed for this kind of install. This is a show I had with my friend Mark Hundley at Herald Street in London, which was a really, speaking of kind of a friend, it was like a super dream because Mark and I make ostensibly fairly different work, and we were lucky enough to have like our friends that run this gallery understand how like kind of weirdly deeply they were connected. Mark's kind of like a language and like text artist, but our work, like our brains and our lives are really connected. So our work, if you look long enough and sit with it, you can kind of see like a kind of a floating idea of like structure and language and emotion, I think. So this was a really exciting show for me. I've been doing these floor pieces, which are really, in general, I don't like the way my work looks photographed, but this encompasses a floor piece, which is pretty unphotographable. But when you stand on it, it's just short of the space that it's in by like 4 inches, so it leaves a border around it, and you basically don't see it, or you trip on it when you walk in. But this is from the show in Dusseldorf. And like that title's taken from The Counterfeiters, an André Gide book. So I'm like really, if titles are a way that I can slip in some literary content, I can. What's done here? And this, speaking of borrowing, when I finished this piece, I realized that it's a pretty much straight up copy of a Richard Serra prop piece. And I even like did a Google image search of it, and I was like, oh, this is like exactly the same. But it's not the same in really particular ways, and I really enjoyed kind of accidental borrowing. It's kind of something we'll talk about it later. I'll just cycle through these. I'm just gonna, we'll talk more about them later, but.
Did you just make that a few weeks ago? No, that's older.
No, this is old, but
Yeah.
this piece I've been wanting to make forever, and then it's kind of been generating work ever since I made it. It's such a dumb idea. I mean, some of my work, I'll be like futzing with the idea for like a year, and the idea is just like, oh, I should do this thing, and the paint should bleed on the corner, and then once I do it, it's kind of electric, and then just for me, and then it leads to like lots more work. But yeah, I've been making this. Definitely led to that suite of Brussels paintings. So this is, to me, like the small things like that, like little techniques that kind of bleed into future works are super important to me. If anyone has a super burning question, they should not hesitate. So this is a good picture, and I think you guys can do some independent research if you're interested. But I'll just finish these, and then Matt can show us. I've been doing these wall sculptures, kind of physicalizing the kind of play with the borders on the paintings. I've done this wall sculpture like 3 times now. It's where I just have a drywall wall made with the exact same materials as the gallery wall, and it's again 4 inches shorter than the wall it's in front of, and it leans back on it, and the wall behind it is painted a solid color. And I'm doing a big project at Art Unlimited in Basel with 2 of these placed throughout this large hall, and they're going to be 6 meters high. One's going to be blue and one's going to be red. But in that situation, it's really going to be invisible because the border is going to basically disappear, and you'll only notice it if you're at a certain distance from it or if you're standing right next to it. And that kind of idea of kind of making the margins kind of the subject or bringing them to the center is something I'm really focused on these days. That's the... Okay, I think we could probably go on to Matt's
So,
clip.
I mostly make feature films and work more in the kind of context of the documentary film industry and television. But I like to show my work in the art world and music context too. I've made a lot of biographical films. But the work I'm doing now, which I'm finishing in a few days, is something I've been working on for several years, and it's an unconventional historical film about the birth of youth culture, and it draws on hundreds of hours of archival footage that traces the emergence of modern teenagers. But something that's kind of consistent in my work is I'm kind of pushing against documentary conventions, and I think of my films as kind of creative nonfiction films. And something I do a lot is I work with recreations that I film in a pretty labored way to look like actual archival footage. So for Teenage, my current film, I shot recreations in the style of period home movies from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and did extensive kind of organic and analog film processes to make that footage look period appropriate. And that material integrates seamlessly with actual archival footage. So that's like a formal strategy that I use in all of my work, but the subject matter and the kind of the narrative styles really differ depending on the subject matter. So I'm going to show just a 1-minute clip from my recent film about Joe Brainard, which fittingly is kind of about the creative friendship between this artist, Joe Brainard, and his best friend, Ron Padgett, the poet.
But is the interview with Ron you interviewed?
Yeah, I interviewed Ron. Okay. Yeah. So in this film, I found an archival recording of Joe Brainard reading his pretty well-known poem, I Remember. And I interviewed his best friend, Ron Padgett, and I found a way to kind of create a conversation between the two sources. So here's just a 1-minute excerpt.
I remember not much to say when someone tells you your fly is unzipped. I remember lighting the filter end of a cigarette when you want to appear cool. I remember at parties after you said all you can think of to say to a person, but there you both stand. I remember trying to have a conversation with someone once with a hair sticking out of his nose.
We were always extremely big fans of each other's work, Joe and I. Always. At least speaking for myself, I mean, I totally admire what he did. I was in awe. I knew I was a lucky guy to have a friend like him that could produce this kind of art.
I remember hating myself after group gatherings for being such a bore. I remember daydreams of being very witty and charming socially.
There was all this energy and this sense of possibility here that I think really gave Joe the feeling that he too could just be a writer. Why not? Why not?
So that's a longer 24-minute film. But so something we did, if we can go back to the computer screen, is we created a blog with some media that we might reference during the talk. And the format that we kind of imagined to kind of help facilitate our conversation was we thought of 4 like kind of topics or themes that feel relevant to what both of us do and what we're interested in. And we thought we'd just like start with going through those themes, but those themes will kind of overlap in the conversation. So those themes are punk, ephemera, ahistorical, and genre. And those are things we're interested in and things that we work with, and we have clips related to them that we may or may not use, but they're here.
Matt's a millennial.
So, so punk. I am working with a writer who kind of wrote the definitive history of punk. So I'm involved in punk in a specific way, but this was the the kind of beginning of this idea of these themes is because Matt would always say to me, "Oh, that's so punk," when someone would do
and
something.
this is making me super embarrassed because I didn't
Why?
realize I said that all the time. So I've been.
He didn't say it all the time, but he
I've
would
been
say
like,
sometimes, "Oh, this piece is so punk," or "That's so punk," and that means something very specific to me that doesn't necessarily relate to kind of like punk music. But I'm curious what it means to Matt, and I'll tell you after he tells you what he thinks it means, what I think it means.
Well, I mean, because you called me on it, I've been thinking about it, and I mean, I remember when I first actually heard what I had been told was punk, when I was young, and I was like, this is so pussy. Like the first time I heard like the Sex Pistols, I thought it was gonna be like, I'm like scared of it.
Totally.
And I worked at a record store like my whole life, and what the things that always were, I don't know. So I developed kind of like a different idea, which I actually don't think is different. I think it is in sync with like what original punk. But to me, and I've been thinking about it in relation to the other keywords, and I realized that music is kind of how I came to artwork, and how I come to music is basically through like an idea of ephemera, record covers, zines, like inserts in records, cassette, like from working at a record store and just from being a young person, like it's in the suburbs. I grew up in suburban LA and San Diego. It's kind of your only access to
Same, totally.
culture. So for me, like the first kind of art epiphany was like looking at a record cover, listening to the record, and having to think about those two things together in my head.
I'm gonna pull up a record cover you posted on the blog.
Did I post a record cover?
Yeah, where did it go?
It might be on the other page.
Bear with us.
That's not it. Oh yeah. Well, this is also relating to. I mean, it all bleeds because I wanted to talk about Peter Saville and Factory Records too, because you could say that all of his work is vaguely plagiarizing, and that New Order cover in particular is based on this futurist poster, almost one-to-one. I think that the dot on the bottom the line on the bottom is moved to the center. But yeah, this is how I understood kind of art and poetry, like through the lens of music. And to me, punk, like I put a clip of Durutti Column, which is a band that was on Factory Records. It's like an early, I mean, to me it's an early punk band, but it's basically like easy listening in a way to, I think, like a teen, like a young, unexperienced listener would be kind of confused. I'll just play the clip, but this is a one-man band that has been making like 2 records a year since like 1978, and makes this like super idiosyncratic, very mellow music, but alongside within the historical kind of channel with punk. And to me, that kind of like questioning of genre and like that to me is what my personal idea of punk, which again kind of relates to ephemera. It's like paying closer attention to like the margins and re-hierarchicizing like the center, pushing the center away and like focusing on the byproducts and the margins. So like I would say this is my favorite band, but and it's just so not punk according to like what you would hear. But we're gonna have a little bit of a YouTube problem, but anyway, so it's been actually very interesting for you to have called me on that because I have to articulate it. But I do wonder what, I mean, it's like, it's not necessarily just like a specific historical
aesthetic,
moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think like when I started working with Jon Savage early on, and his book on punk is called England's Dreaming, and he was kind of witness to all of the...
Was that before or after the Grill Marcus book, the Lipstick Traces?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's contemporaneous with it, I think.
With first, okay.
Okay, there we go. But John, when I was developing the form for this film, Teenage, John told me about this kind of premise that he thought of kind of during the punk era called living collage. He saw young punks buying thrift clothes from previous youth cultures like Zoots and Rockers and Mods, and kind of cutting them up and reassembling them with safety pins into something that was startling and new. And that was being called living collage. I think he called it living collage. And that idea just totally inspired me. at least in regards to teenage, I thought, okay, well, here we are pulling all of these shards and images and voices of teenagers from previous youth cultures and reassembling them into this kind of new work of creative nonfiction that's meant to kind of interrogate the notions of youth and teenagers today and the role of youth in society. But it also is like a really compelling formal premise and a kind of philosophy for filmmaking that I think I'll continue to hold on to. Because really at the kind of the essence of filmmaking is taking things that don't fit together and making them work together. I think that's like the most creative challenge when you make a film. And so for me, like this notion of a living collage became kind of the most interesting thing about punk. And I, I started
like making something totally different from like the previous,
like a kind of anachronism.
Existing
yeah,
material.
In terms of like punk aesthetics, like a certain kind of anachronism. And David Wojnarowicz's photo series, Arthur Rimbaud, New York, is probably my favorite artwork. I just have a really strong emotional relationship to it. Okay, this blog thing is getting annoying. These, for instance, are some early zines that Jon Savage made with Linder Sterling, and it's like the beginning of the kind of graphic cut and paste aesthetic.
So collage would be like this, like a central idea.
Yeah, totally. And but I guess like the Rimbaud New York thing feels like a very punk artwork to me because of the way that David has kind of appropriated the image and biography of Arthur Rimbaud, the French symbolist poet, and applied it to his own kind of time and place. And in a way, I do that in my work by just trying to like inhabit the biographies of kind of cultural figures who I have an idealized relationship with, and to kind of trace their footsteps in like a contemporary setting. And to me, that is like a kind of punk strategy. And that kind of collage is at play in these images.
And I mean, I was telling you about this kind of concept in painting where, especially in like contemporary abstraction, where there's like this idea that there's no historical, there's a nonlinear like playground for painters. There's no like breakthrough to the next movement, and then like, oh, we already did geometric abstraction, now we're going to do gestural abstraction. And like at this point, I mean, I actually have I would talk to you about this. Like, I don't know what I think about this idea because it seems really reductive to me, but that like art history is a playground for contemporary artists, and they can just kind of dip and borrow from anything. And I think that there's a really reductive way to say it, but then there's also this kind of exciting collage, like relating collage, like where you can inhabit another moment, even if you're not knowing that you're doing it. Like I pulled up these Google image things just to show how I accidentally. I recently had a painting that I made this one, which is hard to show all at once. And I don't know, I'm not particularly interested in Motherwell or Barnett Newman. I'm not interested in them at all. I'm just like, they weren't part of my art history. But I keep inadvertently making like a zip painting. And I also keep making these like Robert Motherwell paintings, which like I think is funny, and I'm like really into it. I'm not funny, like I'm kind of into it. Like that I don't even own a Robert Motherwell book. Like I had this painting at this art fair, and someone was like, "Motherwell much?" or something on some blog, and I was just like, "I guess so." And then it's kind of similar to the Richard Serra ripoff. It's like I've come like I don't know, just like the way I cycle through art history is very similar. I'm like really like I'm kind of taking what I want and moving on, and coming to things that I used to hate, and like kind of just like inhabiting kind of artists' projects, and then not discarding them, but just like moving through it. And I find these rhymes with past movements like more not at all alarming, like, and actually kind of I mean, I don't really subscribe to any kind of idea of a breakthrough anymore, a kind of originality. So I think it's a whole and I think my idea of punk in some ways maybe goes back to this really kind of conservative idea of modernism of like kind of problem solving, like ripping it apart and starting over again, which maybe isn't that exciting, but I don't know.
That relates to two of our keywords, genre and ahistorical.
Yeah, I mean, I almost think of painting, like, I think of it as working within a genre, and like some of the art that some of the artists that I'm most interested in are the ones that work really within like really strictly self-imposed rules, be it in literature or painting or, and you definitely relate to genre, right? It must be, I wonder with you, like, in the world of film, it must feel really stifling sometimes to have to call yourself a documentary filmmaker.
Yeah, yes and no. I think like within working commercially, I think people just have expectations about what certain forms are, like what a historical documentary is. People are expecting like historians and experts to explain history and for archival footage and primary sources to illustrate in a literal, direct way. And to me, in terms of my relationship with genre, it's like looking at the expectations associated with specific forms and trying to not just work against them in an anti-authoritarian way, but to try to interrogate what all those conventions and expectations are and to make specific choices about them. So if I'm making a music biopic, like trying to elaborate on what some of the conventions are of that, or a historical documentary. But I think like, jumping back to the issue of something being ahistorical, and I've definitely seen works in your studio that sometimes feel like, who knows what time or place this could have come from. This painting, I could have found it in some storage facility and believed it was from a different time, and I think that's a really interesting thing. It's something that I do while creating recreations, is literally, I feel like I'm sometimes tracing the footsteps of individuals from the past and creating ephemera or objects of another time.
I actually have I do not love work that attempts to kind of put on like a patina of age or anything, and I feel like I do know it happens. I don't have an age thing on my work, but I do know that I accidentally dip into like kind of like people's territories in different times, and I'm really into like B-level American abstract painters, and that has a really particular look, which, and a lot of this, I feel like I do this like involuntary research. I'm just kind of like consuming, and then it just, like the meat grinder metaphor, it's kind of, but I think in that way genre just becomes material rather than structure for me. It's just like I learn about the rules that certain people had for themselves, and then that becomes information to me, and then I don't know, I really appreciate stricture. I do feel like I don't have that many personal rules for myself other than really temporary ones that are set up for each work. But I do like a lot of the artwork that I resonate against is people that have really signed up for genre strictures and like figured out how to create within that.
From the outside, it definitely feels like you're trying very consciously to reinvent the wheel each time and not to repeat yourself, which is the kind of paradigm of painters who develop a signature style, right?
I've tried to make my signature style be that I don't have a signature style, and
we were talking about like sometimes to make your signature style, to not have a signature style means that you're actually totally preoccupied and interested and fascinated by
style,
the conventions of style and genre. Yeah. And like one of the bloggy images you had was like a list of a Wikipedia list of all these different genres. It's a really kind of compelling image, actually, just to analyze like the way.
This is electronic music or dance music genres.
Yeah, just.
Well, also, I think about music all the time, and I think about, like, recently, I was going to bring my iPod and do this, but I just got this, like, Chicago Acid House compilation, and I was listening to it in the car, and I was skipping through it, and the first 4 seconds of every song are exactly the same. It's, like, the same. Like, there's one hand clap, there's one, like, ping sound, and then there's, like, one, like, pitch, like, controlled synth. So if I was skipping through every song and I was like, I can't remember what song I was looking for. But I'm really interested with innovation that happens specifically within dance music, where they have like a really limited palette. They have the same physical compute, like they all like are using the actual same things, but like they come, the artists every fucking day come up with like some crazy brand new thing that you've never heard of. And the ahistorical, I was thinking about ahistoricalness because I think it's also associated with where you are in time. So I was thinking about like music, like how like drum and bass and jungle music sounds so 90s, but now it's like actually being reused, and it could really sound really 2013. Like I just think the farther away you get from a period, the problematics of historical location kind of disappear, and they don't really exist in the bigger picture of history anyways. I mean, especially now when there's just kind of a recycling, I don't know, I think it's a fascinating problem.
We were talking about Simon Reynolds' book, Retromania, which I don't know if people in the audience have read it, but it's a book by a music critic that he basically traces the phenomena of retro fads in culture, and he argues in a fairly orthodox way that our culture's obsession with the past is kind of ruining innovation. And it's funny because while first reading the book, I totally was on board. I was like, yeah, this is fucked up that we're so obsessed with the past and all we know how to do is recycle previous styles and internalize them.
I think I didn't read it because I heard you when you were at that point in the book.
Yeah, but then I started reading it being like, why do we need a kind of orthodox position on this that says that retro-maniacal production is bad? It's can't we exist in a space where we inhabit kind of retro styles and indulge in our kind of retro interests, but also...
Well, I just think even calling it retro is a little bit like pejorative, and I don't know, it's just like the idea that there's going to be an endlessly, this breakthrough kind of paradigm that like you work through this thing and then you get to you break through, and then it doesn't account for kind of porousness of everything, you know. It just thinks that there's this like kind of, yeah, I think it's a little bit inaccurate and like super heroic, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally I've never made a film that takes place in the present, so reading that book kind of challenged me in the sense of trying to think if that was a problem.
But I mean, having seen Teenage in the earlier state, I mean, to me it felt very new. I mean, it doesn't, I don't know, that's the problematic I have with that idea of like problematizing the use of or the looking back. I mean he's specifically talking about music. So
yeah, I mean, I think we both would argue that even though we're kind of like internalizing and then representing styles and kind of genre conventions of work from the past, that we believe that we're creating something that is completely new. You know?
I mean, I see a lot of new like contemporary art daily work where it's like plastic bags with trash in it and like dirt and like a Xerox stapled to it or something, and to me that's so dated already. I don't know, I just think there's that's February of 2012 or something, and which is great. And some of that work I really like, but it's just, I think it's kind of an illusion to think that
yeah, totally. And to me it's like you know, I feel like oftentimes to kind of inhabit the past and make work that is about the past in the kind of material and format of that time takes a different kind of labor and craft. And I want to show a clip from Woody Allen Zelig, which is a film that really inspired the way I shot Teenage. God, our whole media thing is a little disorganized.
I like that we have to cycle past Ator Satas holding the penis face over and over again. I'm not even going to explain it.
So I don't know if people have seen this film,
tenta un approccio diverso e mette il paziente sotto ipnosi.
You know, Woody Allen shot it in the style of the 1920s newsreel documentary. And while making Teenage, my cinematographer and I were really inspired that this film created the look of a 1920s newsreel entirely through organic means. It's not through digital tools, and we learned what they did, and we copied some of their techniques, except we went a little further because we worked in color.
In una riunione privata ascoltano la dottoressa che definisce Zelig.
I don't know what my broader point was about that. Again, this is an experiment. We're going a little all over the place. But I guess my point being that that there is a specific kind of material look of something that's contemporary, and I'm more interested in identifying what those kind of characteristics are from the past and then recreating them in the present because we have perspective on them. And
but you're also, I think that I don't know, then you're making something that's new, that's not existed before, that's your particular Matt Wolf brain making this, using these tools, and therefore it's new. It doesn't have to be like you didn't have to create like a new technique to create something new, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Tell me like what your interest is in ephemera right now.
I've become really obsessed with reading like people's letters, and I'm really into Elizabeth Bishop right now because all this ephemera has been released, like her letters to Robert Lowell and her letters to her editors at the New Yorker. I read this entire super boring book that were just letters between her and her editors at the New Yorker about like commas and periods and like cuss words and getting paid. And but like to me, like I spent more time reading that stuff than reading her actual poetry, and it felt almost as, if not more, like poetry to me. It was just like, again, kind of like my brain's tendency to kind of like push the margins to the center and kind of find subject matter in like the kind of ephemera. And I think I like really, really physically and literally reenact that within the work by focusing on this is so dumb and literal, but like by looking at the edges of paintings and like accidents and marks made by other things onto other things. It's just kind of like, I think, and I never sat down and was like, I'm gonna turn that into like a physical relationship. But
you mean like bringing marginal kind of or incidental things into the center of the work?
I mean, I think just philosophically my life as an artist and as a person has been focused on, I mean, being gay, being like, quote unquote like alternative growing up, and just having to focus on, I don't know, I just think the whole thing stacks up to me being resistant to kind of like the central story and being more interested in like the stuff that it produces or the stuff that, or how connections are made, and like that's to me like the story. Mm-hmm. And like the just Elizabeth Bishop is just kind of like the version that I'm stuck in right now. But it, it started like as a young person. It was, record covers and the research that went on pre-internet to find bands that you liked, and even to find like books that you liked. Like I've definitely found out about the Bauhaus through Bauhaus, the band. Like I have like such a weird, stupid, like teen bastard lineage, mm-hmm. but that kind of research through like wrong mm-hmm. kind of mm-hmm. connections is like kind of the most interesting thing to me. And I try to recreate that in like the physical reality of my work. So I'm not that interested in like lush paintings. Like I'm more interested in like, it's almost like sometimes I feel like it's very theatrical. Like when I'm in studio, I'm like picking up something and pressing it on something else and seeing what happens when something sits on something else for a week. And like, mm-hmm. So that's, to me, that's kind of like that traditionally I think would be the ephemera of a traditional painter. But to me, that's become what I actually do.
Yeah, I mean, to me, ephemera is stuff like the Arthur Rimbaud mask that David Wojnarowicz wore in those photos. And, I've gone to Phil's library and touched that mask. And
it's almost like, did you see the Andy Kaufman show
Yeah, that was an amazing...
Yeah, there was this huge show
of ephemera.
Of all Andy Kaufman ephemera, and it was just... And then there was a member of Andy Kaufman's family, like, sitting there, like...
Discussing all of it.
And it was just like...
Mm-hmm.
So that was very... Like,
yeah, like, I find there's sometimes, like, objects, archival objects. For instance, David Wojnarowicz kept... something called the Magic Box under his bed, and it was like a mini museum that had objects that were emblematic of there are icons from his artwork, like toy bugs and religious icons and pornography and all sorts of toys, and he wrapped them up like a archive and taped them up, and they were in this orange crate that he kept under his bed. And I found that object unto itself to be a biography.
Yeah.
And kind of when I'm making my films, like I get kind of obsessed with certain objects. Like when I was making Wild Combination, Arthur Russell's boyfriend gave me Arthur Russell's actual clothes, which I had an actor wear. And I heard these stories about Arthur riding the Staten Island ferry, listening to mixes of his own cassettes, and I had an actor wearing Arthur's actual clothes in this delayed YouTube video.
I didn't know that this was a recreation.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, that level of proximity and also a bit of fetishization of certain kind of biographical objects is pretty thrilling to me. And one of my favorite series of recreations that I'm working on in teenage relate to Tommy Sheal, who's one of the Hamburg Swings. This isn't Tommy, but these are some archival photographs that I found in a dossier about German youth who were listening to American swing music and wearing British fashion during the Nazi regime. It called them robbers and homosexuals and degenerates. And
Getting hairdos.
Talk about punk. I mean, when I found this image, it was kind of mind-boggling to me that in the 1930s people would dress like that, and that they were teenagers. It's just, it was a real rush to see this image. And the other favorite archival clip that's in the film is an archive called Frame Pool gave me color home movies of German swing kids from the period, and it felt like just hidden history that I know no one has ever seen that film before. So that was very exciting. But I heard about how the Hamburg Swing created yellow Jewish stars, like the Nazi Jewish stars, and they wrote the word swing in it and would wear them. And this is a crude, uncolor corrected still from my recreation, but I created that object, the Jewish star that says swing inside of it, because to me that's an incredible work of art that a teenager in the political context of the Nazi regime would conceptualize something like that was so punk, and that is those kinds of things, and a fetish for that kind of biographical detail that drives me a lot when I make my work.
I don't even think you have to call it a fetish. I think that's just your
well, when you go into the archives and you are really like touching the things, it's a little fetishy because you wear these gloves and stuff. But
well, I have been reading this book about Paul Tech. There's this book that just came. I don't know if it just came out, but it's only about like the attempting to kind of hold on to the Paul Tech's like performance work and how does one do that, and what do you do with like the scraps of paper and the chairs. And I mean, thinking about that we were going to talk about ephemera, I've started to feel called out again that I'm obsessed with like the residue as the actual thing, when with that work it kind of is. He had a really difficult relationship with the representation of his work too. So I think these are all stories that have these have existed in art history and in history in general. This kind of focus.
What do you like? I think of Matt as someone who has the most encyclopedic knowledge of music that I know. I mean, everybody who's really into music, I'm really into music, but people who are into music always have another person who is more into music and introduces them to things they don't know about. I don't know who that is for Matt, but he's that person for me. And I'm just curious, like...
It was my older brother growing up, but then...
Yeah, I'm just curious, like, what your history with music is and what you think your relationship to music is.
I mean, I worked in... my older brother was like a glam rocker, and then a heavy metaler.
And he owns a pretty well-known record store.
And then, so growing up, I was very beholden to music, and then I got a job at 14 in a record store, and then I worked at record stores until it feels like fairly recently. again, it's just been like, I remember I was giving a lecture in Portland, and it was like the day that Mike Kelly had died, and I felt like really compelled to talk about Mike Kelly, and it made me think about Sonic Youth. I mean, I was probably super late to the game, but I kind of really started focusing on Mike Kelly because of Sonic Youth, and then it made me think just like of how that's my kind of idea of, yeah, like how I've been talking about, just this idea of combining a visual, two things, and how forcing someone to sit down with a picture and put the needle on the record, and then those two things collide in your head. And to me, that was the origin of my idea of what art is, and it's made me focus a lot on the ephemera that I create to go along with my work, because I think of a larger picture rather than just the internal scale of a work. To me, I'm also thinking about the scale of the exhibition, and that includes ephemera. And it's all, to me, having to think about it, it kind of has its origin point in like kind of the theater and kind of pure belief and kind of personal universe of music creation and marketing, not in like the evil sense of the word, but like in the,
Well, and to kind of punk established alternative means of distribution for music,
I mean, I was really obsessed with like rock T-shirts. I remember like in junior high, I think people called me Echo and the Bunnyman because I wore the Echo and the Bunnyman shirt every day. I was just like very like focused on like this thing plus that. I don't know. And to me, my idea of poetry is like the structure of kind of like corkscrewing two things together and creating a third.
Yeah, totally.
So it's just kind of like a overall. So music to me, I mean, I don't understand why I'm so focused on music in my life, but
the way you consume music is different than the way most
it's
people
a little dysfunctional,
consume music, but I think it has a relationship to the broader stuff that you do. And I totally identify with that. It's like finding out about music was the first way that I became like a kind of culturally literate person, and it was an exciting process of like identifying peers with shared sensibility. Like that was my first place of being able to do that. Like, and I know that's true for a lot of artists.
And reading the Inventing Abstraction catalog, which is it almost sounds like the way these people were friends and like basically circulating zines and like driving to
who are you talking
like
about?
Kandinsky and like Mark and all these early like and like Apollinaire and like taking a road trip to go see a show and like hanging out and like, but it's very like
exchanging
information. It's very punk rock in a way, and they were like mail, like writing fan letters to other people and being like, oh, can I put this in my zine, basically. And so I don't think it's that foreign to the idea of kind of creativity.
Yeah, and I think growing up and wanting to be an artist, it was about wanting to be in that kind of that system of distribution in which people find out about alternative and independent things and they consume it lovingly. Like I've always wanted to make movies that people I don't know find, and that they have a relationship with the way I had a relationship with things that I discovered at that time. And I think you have that desire as well, I think, right? Should we open it up for questions, maybe?
Yeah. Should I talk about the old man with the penis?
Does this mic still work? Yeah, we should definitely open it up for questions, and you guys can feel free to like pull up other stuff on your site here. But just hearing you talk through these categories, punk, for instance, for me, I think of a very sort of radical political position against power structures and hierarchies. Thinking about appropriation, the way you've framed it sort of as accidental appropriation, or you happen across these things. I found myself thinking about appropriation again. It rooted art historically as a critique of mass culture, and again, power structures and identity. And I wonder, just, do you think of your work in political terms in any ways? Is it doing political work for you, or is that sort of pushed to the side?
I mean, I have a very like fantastical desire that it could be in a very like drip, drop, tick, trickle down kind of way, where like just like a very physical body relationship where because you're paying attention to the edge of a painting, and you're thematizing your focus away from kind of master narrative. That would be like my ideal version of the politics of abstraction, I guess. I mean, I always feel guilty and a little bit shitty about being an abstract painter, because I'm not like, it's difficult to be as political or to speak to the things that are kind of important to me in my personal life through an abstract painting. But that, I think maybe a life of, I think being an artist is political.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
And I think, and living your life and being, to me, it's a larger picture rather than, and a lot of artists, I find that some political artwork can be very like, can be just as market driven and just as kind of like empty as abstract art gets accused of being. So I think what I just explained about like the trickle down, and also like choosing to live your life as an artist, and it can be political. I don't know. Hopefully. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to like, I don't want to double answer the question, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to work in film when I first graduated from college, but I found I was incapable of working with other people.
Hey, guys. Hello? Yeah. Well, I think the first question, because I've heard some whispers around me, I think we'd all like to know who the guy with the penis is.
Oh, it's, sorry, that's Ator Satas. And I was going to talk about Memphis, the design school, as an idea I had of punk. Because I used to previously, Memphis is like an Italian design school that came up in the late 80s, the late 70s and early 80s, and it was, most people think of it as being like the epitome of the 80s. It's like turquoise and pink and grids, and it's plastic, and it's
Like Swatch.
Swatch's tame version of Memphis, yeah. But I don't know, it has a super bad rap, or it's very trendy right now, but I don't know, these guys were super iconoclast. They were kind of the prevailing design in the late 70s was like all beige and like glass and like shag carpet, and their work was just like trying as hard as it could to kind of re-enliven like their world of design. And Ator Satas is an artist that worked in many genres, and he's a bit of a hero to me. This vase is like a signature piece of his, and I just find this picture to be super. It's a lot like the Mapplethorpe photo of Louise Bourgeois, I think. Oh, yeah. And I don't know, I love him. And to me, if I had to like come up with like a list of people that I thought were like really true artists, or he would be one of them.
So my next question is sort of a little bit related to a lot of the conversation today, and also, you know, taps into the Memphis group and so on. And I'm not expecting necessarily a definitive answer. It's just something that interests me, and that a lot of the themes that we're discussing 10 years ago, we would have been throwing around the word postmodernism constantly. Yeah. You know, like pastiche, sampling, you know, sort of recurring retro sort of things coming back in. And I'm interested in this in relationship to the Painter show, and in relationship to just society more generally. Like, what was it that was so inadequate about that term that we don't want to use it anymore? It just feels so inappropriate to now, and yet a lot of these kind of strategies we're talking about sort of, in a way, embody how that kind of period was theorized. So, I
mean, I've been thinking about that too. Like, well, I was, when we were preparing for this, I was like, I wonder why. I mean, I kind of came of age as an artist, I think, I was a young student of art during like the kind of postmodernism. I don't know, maybe it's, I don't know, I kind of still jibe with all the ideas of postmodernism. I don't really even know that I do have a problem with it. I went to that show at the Victoria and Albert Museum about postmodernism, and it felt felt like a children's science museum show about, there was like Annie Lennox's outfit, and there was a shit ton of Memphis, and that seems so confusing. I really enjoyed it just to actually see the work and encounter it, but like that kind of like we're all postmodernists like show at Victoria and Albert was like weird. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just maybe that trickled back down, and maybe it was problematic to like parse those specific ideas away from other ideas that were more modernist, or I don't know. What do you think? I mean, are you finding it?
Well, I think it's partly related to what, even what's happening right now, where you've created, I guess, this is Tumblr, no, it's WordPress. You guys have sort of created this sort of stream of references and so on, and you were talking to Matt Wolf about how, yes, there's a lot of sort of retro references and so on, but it's subjectively conditioned through his approach.
Yeah.
And for me, I think what was sort of attendant to that postmodernism debate was this kind of whole idea of sort of pastiche and a certain kind of cynicism, or sometimes it was about micro-narratives and macro-narratives or whatever, which was like something I liked, but a lot of the rest of it was, say, in relationship to painting. Postmodern painters were in a way sort of, it was sort of like implicitly a critique of that form or that medium. So somehow I think it became way too overburdened because it took away the idea of the subjectivity of a person, as it were, a curator of culture, whether that embodies itself in a genre or medium or some other way. So yeah, it's something I'm sort of interested in, but I think it came up a lot today. Yeah.
I think with the postmodern thing, it was for painters, it seemed just indexical, which is what you seem to, you refer to it being in the work, but the words like soft or edges or hard seem to be more interesting to you, or residue seem to be and you're talking about clashing things and things kind of bumping up against each other, which is not quite a kind of postmodernism in its truest sense. It's less indexical, I think, even though I think it's in the work. I
mean, I think it's a little problematic to call any strategies of pastiche and appropriation postmodern. It's just kind of I think that postmodernism should be like placed in a particular historical time and place, and I just think like I don't know how useful that particular theoretical term is in terms of looking at these strategies, because these strategies obviously have been happening in all sorts of different cultural moments beyond the kind of the era of postmodernism too.
If I can. If I can add something to this talk about postmodernism, I think that there's an element of violence in the term, that people were really wanting to get beyond modernism. They saw modernism as oppressive, and their idea was, let's kill it off. And in fact, postmodernism has been used by literary figures since the 1920s.
Yeah.
And even that early, there was this will to kill off modernism. And maybe one important distinction to make is that that generation has kind of passed away in the contemporary gaze, and there's a new form of these strategies we're talking about. And maybe a nice way of thinking about it is that it's more generous or more inclusive, as opposed to being something that has a kind of Oedipal violence to it.
Or reactionary kind of point of view.
I have I guess along the lines of sort of mentioning like how you put together your WordPress page.
That was Matt.
Okay. But do you ever wonder that, okay, for a question for you, Matt, then, do you ever wonder that as you throw things up and kind of do it in a random way, and this is so much a part of our culture of just like seeing something and pinning it and whatever, we're sort of pushing it, and this is in your work, you're pushing it farther from the source, sort of devitalizing it and actually withdrawing the power from the original source of it?
Well, I don't look at this blog as being too specific of a form. It's more like trying to emulate the way that we exchange information and trying to create a form for a conversation. So in some ways, this conversation is unsuccessful because it's hard to like it doesn't have a total focus to it. We're just kind of like waxing on stuff. So it's weird to do it publicly, but also the subject of our conversation is about these seminal moments in our lives in which we exchanged information or discovered new cultural material and the networks of peers that we formed to do that. And to me, this is a contemporary way in which I think we both exchange information with each other and with other peers, and the randomness of it is a reflection of the kind of conversations that we organically have.
And I don't really buy into that, like, reducing the, I mean, I think there's like, upside of the internet is like, if I want to talk about Ator Satas, I can bring up a picture, and I think it's a little bit reductive to claim that the status of that vase has been reduced by my ability to bring it up really quickly and show it to you. And I think Matt and my creative, and I'm a little bit older than Matt, but I've been able to use like digital means to do research and to find things and to definitely further my kind of purview of what I have access to. And I think you were trying to allude to like the sapping of the aura of the original. Is that what
yeah, in a sense, but I see what you're talking about. This is much more personal than, you're not making a statement about anything. You're just saying this is a point of reference that we just hit off of, and if you come across it, great, and if you don't, that's fine too.
Well, it's more like this is this blog, which we'll probably erase, is more like a visual reflection of a type of conversation that we were trying to have.
Yeah. And when I see an artist speak, I've recently stopped giving my like, and then I made this one, and then I decided I didn't like light pink, and I'm more interested to understand like 10 seconds of an artist's life in the studio. I think is way more valuable to me as an artist and as a viewer. So I kind of made a like a pact with myself, like I will not make any more boring lectures written on the. So I'd rather have like a weird fucked up WordPress than like a
formalized
PowerPoint
slideshow. Yeah.
Can I just ask you also about adding the paper rolls? Just how that came about. You sort of had, I understand, a kind of a carte blanche to do anything. How did you come to that? That's
like a second version of that work, and that actually came about similarly. It's almost like it's a piece of ephemera. I was in Denmark on a residency, and I was given the space that had lots of walls and a ton of windows. It was a newly built, like, fancy piece of architecture, and I thought I would do some wall painting, and it turns out that house paint in Denmark is incredibly expensive. And it became prohibitive for me to do all this wall painting. And I had a friend who worked in the photo lab, and I came up with the idea that I would just I would just like posterize colors on like a photo printer and wallpaper. And then that idea quickly fell apart. But in the meantime, I had all these prints, these like I would like print a color and it would kick out of the printer and fall onto the ground, and then I would like I would be like, oh, get this out of the way. So I had these tubes of color laying all over the place. And I've been really I've been aching to be a little bit more three-dimensional, and I was installing that show, and I felt like the floor area just felt super empty. And this like permission, which is kind of a theme in my life as an artist, to just give into like the dumbest ideas. I just went and grabbed them, and it just felt again very like this theatrical thing. I felt like I was like a dancer, bringing like red here. So it was an accident. It was like these pieces of off cut from this other project that, and then because I was in like rural Denmark, I could test it out on this weird captive audience of teenage art students, and I really liked it. And then the Walker built these like incredible like plastic things to keep them from getting knocked over. But that's how most of my work is made. It's like I accidentally leave something somewhere, and I like the way the resulting image, or like one, it's very like domino effect of almost work creating its own ephemera that then becomes its own subject or something. But that's like kind of the definitive example of that kind of process.
Filmmaker, can you double answer that question about politics, Filmmaker Matt? Because you seem to have the more direct, like, lineage
my new
from
film is
politics.
very political because I was starting to feel that to make biographical films was like, you know, you're basically, I mean, a great biography, you know, is like a, you know, it invites other kind of cultural histories and ideas. Like I think the recent David Wojnarowicz biography, Fire in the Belly, is a wonderful piece of literature. It's not experimental in any way, but it's, I feel, a definitive account of the culture wars and a very compelling account of the experience of AIDS in New York City, and a fairly definitive account of the East Village art scene kind of through the prism of David Wojnarowicz's life. So in a way, biographies can do a lot, but there's only so much they can do, and I was kind of yearning to do a kind of broader, more expansive cultural history. And when I started making the film, I thought it was basically going to be a kind of deep analysis of pop culture and kind of teenagers' role and bringing that, popularizing, new forms of music and style. But the film is actually incredibly political, and it traces the origins of a youth movement and a kind of basically a struggle for young people who are oppressed by their parents and polices and governments, and their struggle to be treated like equals. And after making the film, I feel that the early 20th century is the kind of moment of the youth. The early 20th century is the period in which the youth movement emerged, and that movement should be looked at alongside other kind of civil rights struggles. So my film is expansive in its political scope. It's definitely not an activist tool, but in a sense, I ended up making something that I perceive almost like a social issue film. It just doesn't adhere to those conventions anyway. So I ended up making something much more political than I ever anticipated.
But I also think, having seen it in an early version, I think its actual format is fairly innovative and political in a way that it's kind of it's not like Ken Burns, and it's like really makes you kind of like it's political in the way that I want my like abstraction to be political, and that it's kind of bucking a little bit of the genre, I guess, but in a way, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the film is told entirely from the point of view of young people, and the dialogue of the voiceover is cribbed from hundreds of teenage diary sources. So it's as if you're within the head of a teenager, but the story is told by teenagers from America, England, and Germany. So it's a fairly, it's a very experimental approach to that type of filmmaking.
So how about one more question? Or maybe some Rudy column.
Yeah, I don't think it's working.
Okay, Matt, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.